I'm Melody Barnes, and I want to start out just by giving you a little bit of context for those of you who don't know what we're doing, why we're doing it. And I think many of you touched on it. Our firm belief is, given the magnitude and the complexity of the challenges that we're facing as a country and worldwide today, that there's no single entity, no single person, no single sector that can really wrap their arms around these challenges and help address them and take us to where we want to be in a significant way. That it takes a collaboration across sectors, bringing a lot of different levels of expertise and people working toward a significant goal and doing it in kind of an orchestrated dance. I know we've got a lot of people from the arts here today, but an orchestrated dance as people move towards that goal in order to do it, and to do that successfully. I first started working on these issues when I was in the White House from 2009 to 2012, and we started thinking about the big challenges facing us and the fact that we saw so many interesting, smart things happening in local communities. And that wasn't, not only wasn't that getting lifted up in an important way, but also we weren't interrogating why certain communities were so successful. So we wanted to take that on and developed a council of business leaders and philanthropic leaders and those from the NGO community, those who work in grassroots organizations to work with us. There were about 26 of them. And they started to look at this issue and study these communities, but at the same time wanted to do it in the context of looking at a particular challenge and opportunity. And as our friends from the Aspen local Aspen Foundation just mentioned, we specifically started looking at this issue of opportunity youth. And that was language that we started to develop because so much of the country was talking about disconnected youth. And there's a natural negative inherent in that language, but in particular as we started to talk to young people and hear their views of themselves, their view for their future, it's like they weren't disconnected. They saw in themselves great opportunity and they were hopeful. They wanted to be bonded to their communities and they wanted a chance to continue education and to attach to the labor force. So the White House Council studied this, made recommendations that the government is now pursuing, but we also thought in the spirit of what was happening on local communities that this wasn't a federal government issue with the federal government supporting local communities, but we needed to also focus on this from the outside. And Elliot and Walter were terrific as we approached them about identifying a home for this work, and that home being the Aspen Institute. I lured, cajoled, harassed Steve and Monique into joining me here and starting this work. And we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of that work in a minute, but that gives you a sense of why we wanted to do it. We wanted to study the strategy of collective impact that we identified as what communities were using, in some cases using that definition or not, very successfully. And we also wanted to continue the work initially just with opportunity youth, but our goal, our dream is really to use this theory of the strategy for change across a whole range of different communities doing and solving different kinds of problems. The last thing I'll say before I want to show you all a brief clip is that I often think about, people say, well, why this moment for collective impact and why this moment for collaboration? And we don't pretend as though, we've discovered collaboration, like, we discovered the wheel and fire. People have been doing this for generations and generations, but there's a discipline to the way certain communities are using this now that differentiates it. And we talk about it as there's this moment that's arrived because of a number of different reasons that's making it so impactful and I think picking up steam and momentum. And we were talking about this one day. I often use the example of the rolling suitcase, which we don't think about it. I mean, most of us have suitcases with wheels and we roll them through the airport. But for whatever reason, I like quirky information. It's like, discovering things I didn't know before. For some of you identified your reason for being here. And the first rolling suitcase was actually invented in 1970. But it didn't catch on for another 15 to 17 years. And the reason for that is because so many people thought, oh, nobody's going to want to use that. Women were just really moving into the workforce en masse. And all of a sudden, airports got bigger and bigger and bigger. And people thought, well, men, manly men won't want to use rolling suitcases. But manly men were smart and they didn't want to lift those heavy things. I remember my dad lugging the suitcases to the car. So all of a sudden there was this moment that created a market for the rolling suitcase. And by the time you get to the mid-1980s, everybody had them for the reasons that I just mentioned. And we look at collective impact and collaboration in the same way. That all of a sudden we've seen communities that are doing the work effectively. There's a desire to build a field around this and to really understand it and understand why it works. We also know that the challenges, and someone mentioned this before, that are being attacked on the federal level for different reasons. And I worked in the federal government for 20 years, but there's stagnation, there's calcification. We aren't solving them, but local communities are really addressing them head on. So there's this moment, we think, for collective impact as well. So with that, I want to show you a brief clip and then give you all a chance to engage before I turn to Steve. So that's a brief description of collective impact. And I thought I would just pause for reactions, if any, or thoughts. This isn't, not cajoling anyone into anything, at least not at this point. But if those of you who are working in this space have thoughts about it, or those of you who just have heard about collective impact have any thoughts about it, and then we'll turn to Steve and he'll talk a little bit more about it. Okay.
It might make sense to try to get a little deeper. The video doesn't quite. I thought some people were just going to have to get up and run to the restroom, given all the water. So if you have to do that, I completely understand. I may have to cut my commentary short. So collective impact is this kind of language that's being used in the social sector a lot right now. So for those of you who came for something absolutely different, you're going to get it. And it really is what Melody was describing, which, so many folks plugging along at the community level who are getting to sort of pretty good individual impact. 30 young people here, whatever the issue area might be, 20 new houses retrofitted for energy efficiency over there. But really trying to figure out how do you, as you do that work, aggregate that impact across a broader effort that really leads to metric change in communities. It really changes and transforms lives. And that was sort of what the frame of collective impact triggered for so many people, a kind of aha moment in the nonprofit social sector, in the government sector, where folks sort of realize, we can't work in silos if we're going to have the kind of step change that we want to see on the issues we work on. And Monique will go deeper on one particular issue that many of you are interested in, which is the opportunity youth, formerly disconnected youth population. But this firm, FSG, so first let me ask you, how many of you before you came in this room had heard the term collective impact. You know, wow, that's pretty, that's kind of amazing. And how many of you hadn't heard of it before, which is what we sort of expected? So about literally half the room had, half the room hadn't. This is indicative of how this kind of concept of this deeper cross-system, cross-sector collaboration has taken root. And this firm, FSG, wrote this original article. Some of you forwarded it 57 times because we know it was the most forwarded article in the history of the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And most people say, like, who cares? But it turns out the Stanford Social Innovation Review is read by almost every foundation's CEO, and it has a lot of influence on, in particular, on the social sector. And so when FSG wrote this collective impact article, it really kind of resonated for the reasons I was describing earlier. And what they did is they really looked at a number of effective community collaborations that did move the needle, that did make change, that did gain the attention of the White House Council for Community Solutions. And when they looked at those kinds of collaboratives that were effective, they found these 5 core elements that were in the video. But I'm going to go over them again really quickly because we're rushing through this, and we want to kind of leave you with a sense of what we mean when we say collective impact. So the 5 things that they identified in that article were, 1, a common agenda. And that's really the idea that everyone collectively understands the problem. So the thing that the original FSG article highlighted was really this kind of idea that systems need to align, and the case study really was Strive. So how many of you have heard about the Strive collaboration in Cincinnati that's now being replicated all over the place, including elements of it with our good friends from the Aspen Community Foundation and parts around here? So that Strive model is the cradle to career theme. So they pulled together a bunch of people around the common agenda of really getting more young people to the finish line of a college degree and to real jobs. And they saw that the early childhood folks were not talking to the K-12 folks, and the K-12 folks were not talking to the higher ed folks, and the workforce folks weren't connected at all, and the private sector wasn't really sharing their labor market needs with that group, and the private sector wasn't connected, and the curriculum wasn't aligned to where the jobs were. And so out of that came this collaborative. Philanthropy helped drive it. So all of the sectors in our society were aligning around a common agenda for young people in that particular example. The second thing they identified was shared measurement. So they came together and picked a set of metrics that you can find on the Strive website that really everyone agreed to. So that was the everybody in the same boat rowing in the same direction. In most communities, regardless of the issue, you got a lot of little boats all rowing in different directions. And this is an effort through shared measurement to say, look, you achieve what you measure. We're going to measure the right things. We're going to move forward. That's a key element of collective impact. And that's sort of the difference between collective impact and some examples of collaboration. We focus on all forms of collaboration, and we believe that that we have to work together to solve our most pressing issues. But shared measurement introduces a discipline that goes beyond collaboration that sometimes is just called kumbaya, And so shared measurement is a second element of collective impact that they identified around collaboration in communities at work. The third is mutually reinforcing activities. And that is, if the early childhood folks are really working on the right stuff, that's going to reinforce the curriculum that's happening in K-12. If the post-secondary folks are aligning their developmental courses to be accelerated for the young people who show up in developmental education with the kind of high school curriculum that's behind them and vice versa, those activities across the continuum are mutually reinforcing. So that's the idea that if you work together on a joint plan, you'll get further ultimately faster, though this work is very slow initially. So mutually reinforcing activities. Continuous communication. One of the things we've learned as we looked at communities across the country is that change happens at the speed of trust. That trust building is super important in this work. that it never ends, but that there's a lot of history of trying to work together, a lot of new leaders coming into roles and old leaders stepping out. And so how do you continuously build trust? And continuous communication is one of the key factors for that. But if you're not all communicating in this collaborative effort in a community, how are you going to know if you're being successful? How are you going to course correct in real time, regardless of the issue that you're working on? So really sort of open communication was the fourth thing that they identified. And then the fifth is this notion of backbone support. So this is kind of new language, but it's really caught fire in the social change sector, that it turns out that all these systems that work in silos, if you go to the Department of Health and you say, we really want you to work with the Department of Education so that the young people are sort of getting the kind of wraparound supports that they need, the health supports that they need, nutrition, et cetera, and then we want the Department of Education to come work with you to align, blah, blah, blah. If you're paying for a part of a person's time in one department to work with another department, you're never quite going to get there. You need a backbone in the community. So in this case, the example we've been talking about with the Aspen Community Foundation, they're playing a backbone role, which is someone, at least one person, who wakes up every day in that community saying, how am I going to connect these systems? How am I going to herd the cats? How am I going to be the buster of the silos that get these folks collaborating in a way that is we look at this a lot. There's a sort of servant leadership role there. It's an egoless kind of backbone supporting role. And so that was the other thing that FSG found in all these effective collaboratives. So those are the 5 elements of collective impact. And what's really exciting about it is there is this kind of movement around this work. So even just a month ago, we at the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions, in partnership with FSG, the sort of thought leaders who helped shape this frame, have launched this Collective Impact Forum. And last month, we have a funder community of practice overarching this whole forum. And you can learn everything you don't want to know or might want to know about collective impact at www.collectiveimpactforum.org. And as part of launching that, we had our first funder foundation community of practice, funders, individual donors, community donors. And we had to bump the registration up twice. We had actually 225 funders come to Aspen last month, all of whom are investing in or working on this approach. And eventually we'll talk about how philanthropy is different next summer at Ideas when you do collective impact. But it's much more of a collaborative approach to grant making. And so the last thing I'll say, and then jump to Monique on sort of a deeper dive of this work, is Melody did not have to convince me to come work with her and with Monique on this. And I was at the Gates Foundation when I joined Aspen. And this is speaking to why many of you came or come from community. I sort of have fundamentally self-identify as this grassroots, practitioner. And then I woke up one morning and I was in my 3rd job in philanthropy, and it was the largest philanthropy in the history of humankind, and I realized not so grassroots. And so, my joke about it is I came to the Aspen Institute to get closer to the ground, and closer to the grassroots. But it turns out that that's not really a joke. It really is amazing as we've looked around the country at the kind of deeper, more collaborative work that's happening every day, where folks are sort of saying, well, kind of whole system failure requires whole system solutions. And they're responding to that kind of Einstein quote that we can't solve the problems we've created with the same thinking that created them. And you're seeing this kind of incredible momentum around positive change through this collaborative framework. So it's super exciting to be a part of it. And it's even more exciting to get to follow Monique's lead as she applies that collective impact frame with the opportunity youth population that Mel was talking about. So I'll kick it over to Monique, and she can share a little more about what we're doing. And should we use the video to transition that? Yeah. So we have one more video we're going to roll. It's another really short one that gives you a sense of how we're using the collective impact frame to address the opportunity youth, once called disconnected youth population. So can we roll that? Oh, we got to crank it up. That rock and roll is way too good. Thank you.
The Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund, its goal, to demonstrate the positive impact of cross-sector and cross-system collaboratives on the lives of 6.7 million young adults between the ages of 16 and 24. Young adults disconnected from work and school, those we refer to as Opportunity Youth.
We're really trying to support communities that are coming together to work across the different systems that serve Opportunity Youth.
It feels great because I can see people are actually paying attention. People are actually taking the chance to sit down and think, okay, so the youth are involved. You know, what's their information? What's their drive? What makes them want to do this work? And also how to change and shape this work.
And I've just been letting my voice be heard more because I feel like it's important for people to understand the struggles that we come from and how far we can get if we're invested.
It's been great just to pick up on everybody's energy. I mean, it's exciting when you have a group of people who are passionate about Opportunity Youth and beyond the role, beyond their jobs or their careers. They really want to make a difference, and when you're around that kind of energy and spirit, you know good things are going to happen.
Building on the work of the White House Council for Community Solutions, which was launched by President Obama, we established the fund to demonstrate the power of the collective impact strategy to improve outcomes in education and employment for Opportunity Youth. We also wanted to make the case for increased adoption of this strategy as an effective method for creating community change.
To partner nationally, not just with funders, but also with other colleagues in other states that are doing the same type of work, and to have the opportunity to learn and also share our moments of success and our moments of challenge with others really is invaluable because it adds texture to what we're doing.
It's tackling a problem that is such an invisible problem in a very, very visible way, and it's by acknowledging that everyone has a responsibility for both naming the problem, defining its parameters, and developing solutions for it.
The Aspen Forum for Community Solutions, in partnership with Jobs for the Future, gathered the collaborative teams for the first time. This group, representing diverse sectors, came together at the Aspen Institute campus to explore strategies that deepen the impact of their efforts to reconnect Opportunity Youth to education and employment. The convening successfully developed a peer network, launched a learning community among the 21 teams, and energized everyone for the important work ahead.
I made a lot of new networks today, a lot of new friends, and I'm just looking forward to the next opportunity to come together.
Kind of crazy to see snow in Aspen in that video, right? On a day like this.
So before I jump in, I want to just see if anyone has any questions. Okay.
I have a question insofar as a lot of this seems to focus on the substantive work that's being done. I'm curious with some of the nonprofits that I'm dealing with, there's so much operational dysfunction in some of these groups, and some of these groups that don't have effective boards, don't have meaningful fundraising operations. Really, I'm dealing with two organizations right now looking at merging, which are they're very complex operational things going on. And by the way, I think in the end there are successes and failures, and there are going to be winners and losers even in nonprofits that really aren't achieving measurable outcomes and successes. How are you viewing these things and approaching these problems?
Let's go to Monique. No, those are huge issues in the nonprofit sector, and the short answer is we're not doing enough to address any of those issues. What we're trying to do is pull together coalitions, support coalitions in communities where those kinds of challenges can get more support. So in a lot of ways, it's around stitching together more social capital across the nonprofit sector, public sector, private support to solve these kinds of challenges. Now, there are some good resources on mergers in the nonprofit sector, and you probably have read some of the, Bridgespan's got a couple of pieces about it. There are a few sort of management consulting firms that have written about it. But at the end of the day, we're really trying to help create a sense of continuum across the nonprofits, and we're not tackling the harder issues of capacity and sustainability in the way we would like. One of the things we're trying to do, and Monique will talk about this, is kind of build more civic infrastructure which is, we could unpack that language at some point, but more community capacity to drive the change themselves versus a kind of top-down landing in your community with an idea approach to the work. And that means that we need a really robust, vibrant, healthy nonprofit sector. And so we want to work on these things. We just can't do all of it at once.
I would just add a couple of things to that go a little bit to the infrastructure that we're trying to support. When we analyzed and we looked at a range of different programs and collaboratives around the country before we got to the group of 21 that we've been working with now. And we put that through a filter. We wanted to work urban, rural, and tribal. And that was very important to us. And we also knew that we would find collaboratives at different stages of maturity. And we wanted to take that on and make that a part of what we were learning in the learning community, knowing everyone wasn't going to step in and have something sparkly and tied up with a bow. So we started out with 2 implementation grantees, those that were much further along, and the other 19 were development grantees that we've worked with over the course of the past year. And we're about to move to another stage with hopefully many, if not all of them, going to the development or the implementation stage. And some of the kinds of things that we've worked on with them, doing, and I often refer to it as the non-sexy stuff, it's a culture of data and data systems, which is really, 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 really hard. I mean, that's hard, and I've worked in the federal government. You think big institutions and agencies and departments that are still trying to figure this out. So to work with those communities to try and help develop that, to fund it, because that's often where resources aren't going. To develop the backbone structures so that you've got the coordination that Steve was talking about. It doesn't go to a lot of what you're saying, and Steve's answer I think is spot on with that, but it is starting to try and inject that into those collaboratives so that the nonprofits, the government structures, the philanthropy that's working with them all can learn and benefit from those things.
Yeah. And that's a great transition as well to go deeper, because part of what I wanted to frame for you all this morning is the role of Opportunity Youth in this work. And the piece I just want to pause and pivot to for a moment, just to also build on the answer to your question as well, is this notion of, with establishing the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund and creating the capacity or supporting the capacity in communities to identify not only what their issues are, but to come together around fundamentally what their solution is, then it enables them to address other issues in the future going forward. And so again, we have communities, this 21 community portfolio, that are in a variety of stages, but in the sort of the long-term goal and hope of this, without question, is that those other issues, I think, across the social sector could be addressed as this work evolves into the future. But so I want to pivot and shift now again to talk a little bit about the role of Opportunity Youth in this work. As Melody and Steve mentioned, our work is born out of the White House Council. They wrapped up with these recommendations, and one of the ones that was most salient to us was keeping youth at the center of this work. So in establishing the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund and supporting 21 communities across the country, it's really important to underscore the role that these young people play themselves in the collaborative. So as you saw in the video, we heard from young people who are talking a little bit about their work, but I wanted to just give you a sense of who some of these young people are and what the work looks like on the ground when we talk about bringing the K through 12 system to the table, bringing the post-secondary system to the table, thinking about the role of employers, thinking about the sort of broader supports that this group needs, like for example, when we talk about foster care youth and their transitions out of the foster care system, what does that mean? Or for example, the juvenile justice population and the many needs that they have as they think about transitioning from secondary, for example, into the workforce or into post-secondary. So just to create some context for you of who these young people are, the types of barriers that they face, and how collaboratives are actually keeping their voice at the center, I think is really important to underscore, because when we support communities across the country and we talk about our national learning agenda, young people are actually at the center of this work and play a really important role in designing what these strategies look like. And we actually, Melody and Steve were part of a panel yesterday where we had a young person come and tell his story, actually from Denver. And one of the pieces that I just want to echo that Melody actually, it was a point that she made yesterday, and I want to underscore before I share a little bit about who these young people are, is that these young people are not exceptional. But because of the work that these collaboratives are doing on the ground, and particularly because they now have a second chance to complete high school, they have a second chance to get the type of post-secondary supports that they need, they are actually able to implement extraordinary change in their communities. And because we are supporting rural, urban, and tribal communities, and also because of time, I actually can only share 2 stories from an urban community and a rural community, but these are only 2 stories in a much broader portfolio of what young people are doing and the collaborative efforts across the country. So the very first story I wanted to tell is about a young lady from Maine named Carly, who is actually in the video. So this young lady, and this gets to the point in the back about the foster care system. She was in the foster care system. She actually attended 8 schools in order to complete her high school credential. And she was transitioning into post-secondary education. And as you may imagine, she experienced tremendous barriers with completing her post-secondary education. She was able to connect with the collaborative in Maine that's really focused on reconnecting youth not only to secondary education, but also to post-secondary education. And we hosted a convening here in Aspen last November. And they brought the collaborative together. This young lady was a part of it. And they were talking about not only the issues that these young people experience in the foster care system, but they said to this young woman and to some of her peers, but what is it that you actually need in order to achieve and be successful? And her response was, I need support once I age out of the foster care system to continue to go to school, to be successful in higher education. And part of the work that they are doing at the Maine Collaborative is training young people not only on how to tell their stories, but also how to testify before state legislation. This young lady, Carly, went on to testify before the state legislation in Maine. She told her story about needing post-secondary supports, and she also helped to write legislation that became an act. The name of this act is LD 1683, and it's an act to improve degree and career attainment for former foster care children. I want to share with you all that this past spring, the act was signed into law, and now the state of Maine is going to continue to support all former foster care youth through the age of 26 that are pursuing a higher education. And what's really important to know is that this was, without question, part of the work that Carly did with the support of adults in this second chance pathway, this opportunity that she got. But it doesn't stop there. She's training other young people on how to tell their story, how to testify before the state legislation, and how to really do community organizing so that other foster care youth can tell their story, and not only that, but have a platform to support others to tell their story. And she's part of the collaborative effort. So she's not only helping to design the strategy of reconnecting other foster care youth in Maine, she's also helping to implement that strategy as well.
So I'll just say one thing about that as you go to the next story.
Yes.
Is that, so part of the goal is to have all these different systems talking to each other. So actually the Speaker of the House from Maine came with the collaborative we fund in Maine to our convening. Because each of the sites brought up to 10 different leaders. So you had deputy superintendents of schools coming with community college presidents, coming with the judge who cares about kids in juvenile justice coming. And so in this case, the Maine Collaborative brought their Speaker of the House. He came and learned about the issues that face these young people. That broke down silos, and that helped facilitate that legislation. That helped put Carly in the right room at the right time to get much more support through higher ed for foster care kids in Maine. So that's sort of part of how we try to operate, breaking these silos down between sort of purse string holders in government and policymakers and the young people themselves, and putting them at the center.
Yep. So the sort of through line there is listening, keeping youth at the center, and bringing all of these actors together in the room to look at systems change, and then letting the youth needs really lead and drive fundamentally what that looks like. And then the other story I wanted to tell really quickly, because I'm mindful of time and we want to make sure we engage you all in a discussion and also hear about what you all are experiencing in your collaborative efforts as well. is about a young man who also is actually in a video. This is Aaron in Baltimore. And Aaron is actually the board chair of an organization, Youth as Resources. And what this organization does, it's all youth-led, is they make grants to young people in the community that are really looking to do community organizing around issues of social change. The types of projects that they support range from transportation challenges to obesity, like issues of diabetes that may also impact the local community. Another piece is also thinking about how you keep the community clean and how you engage local community members in civic action to keep and organize around the community, keep the community clean and organized. And so Aaron is part of the collaborative that's working in Baltimore. This past year, he was able to make over 50 grants to other young people to not only support their efforts, but to help them through this peer connection, think about community organizing, think about leadership, and think about how they can continue to sustain their efforts to support other young leaders. Again, he's part of the collaborative in Baltimore. He's helped them identify not only their strategy, but now, as Melody was talking about, as we think about transitioning into implementation grant making, Aaron is core to how they're thinking about what that work will look like on the ground. And so that's just one more story, again, of young people who, through having a second chance to go back to school or to connect to the workforce, and I would also underscore service. So young people who have the opportunity to connect to some sort of service that also connects to transformation has enabled them to be a part of these collaborative efforts that really are working to address some of the systemic barriers that Steve was speaking to, while also being a support and a network for their peers and a voice for how this collaborative can continue to sustain change for other young people and the system barriers that this population traditionally faces. So again, I would underscore these are not extraordinary young people, but they have gotten meaningful opportunities to be in service to others. And then the last piece I'll share before I wrap up and we get into some discussion is what we are also trying to do with the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund is create a national platform for these youth leaders to not only tell their stories, but to think about how at the national level they support each other to bolster their collective efforts. We are also thinking about how we sustain this pipeline of young leaders so that this work will continue and have a multiplier effect that can aggregate beyond even what it is the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund endeavors to do. So I think that just gives you all a sense of who some of these young people are, some of the work that they're doing, and the real impact that this work can have on policy and the systemic barriers that can undermine some of their outcomes. So I'll pause here and see if there are any questions.
John.
So two quick thoughts / questions. One is.
Oh, wait, here's got a mic for you.
Oh, sure. So it's exciting this is exciting. It's great. And I wonder when you are bringing sort of policymakers and young people together, has there been an opportunity to sort of pre-survey them around their reflections and attitudes before and after? Because I think one of the things that you're trying to secure is shifts in attitudes, and I think that would be a powerful part of the narrative, particularly where you can compare in the same responses to the same questions by young people and by policymakers, and then see if we can actually get them to move to more similar responses. The second reflection is, very familiar with collective impact model, know lots of the models around the country, think it's a really powerful lever for change. One of the struggles that I see is that as we are establishing these backbone organizations or reinforcing and supporting them, if there's not, oftentimes these are organizations that have existed, and to your point about trust, really important, but a lot of them I've seen are sort of usurping the opportunity to step into that backbone role. And I just frequently, unfortunately, don't see a lot of, I would say, honesty there. And I wonder if there's not an opportunity to create 360s among the other organizations that are part of that collective impact to really evaluate the leadership of the backbone organization to hold them honest.
Yeah, that's a good. I don't know, we don't have a ton of time because we could do a whole nother session on both of those topics. So I'll just try to be brief. And one is the framework for the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund. We sort of said, great, White House Council loved the collective impact frame and they loved the Opportunity Youth thing and they elevated all kinds of stuff. And you can find all kinds of resources on our website at www.aspencommunitysolutions.org, some of the papers that were produced, et cetera. We structured the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund to say there's a lot of buzz about collective impact, not a lot of evidence yet. So we're going to do evidence building work. And Opportunity Youth or disconnected youth are the perfect population, as Melody described, because they're not disconnected. The systems that are meant to be serving them are disconnected. Foster care, juvenile justice, K-12 higher ed, we talked about that. So in structuring that, we then went super local. We sort of said, we're going to look at the world and we're going to fund these backbones. So we tried to do the due diligence to understand backbones that had real trust already in the community, that had real legitimacy. In some places that was easy. So we found a backbone in Philadelphia. We all have been in this work, so we know that the Philly Youth Network has huge legitimate trust and has actually moved the needle on the dropout rate already. So our grant is additive to the work that they're doing. So we tried to go in to mature backbones so that we could avoid this kind of high stakes, picking one group in a community to be the collaborative, while half the other folks in the community are like, hey, they don't collaborate with us, and we're actually doing the real work with young people. So we haven't solved it, but part of the way we punted on it was to go with the already existing collaboratives that we knew were effective. And then we work really hard on this servant leadership frame with the backbone partners who are in the portfolio of grants. And the other thing, just to finish how we've set that up, is it is a funding collaborative. So we have all these foundations learning with us. So that's how we were able to aggregate close to $10 million that we're giving out over a 4-year period across the country. It's because all the NPR funders, Rockefeller, Ford, Kellogg, Gates, Bloomberg, plus a lot of high net worth individuals and individual donors, plus the corporate sector and corporate philanthropy have all stepped up to pool their resources with us. They have representatives, leaders from all of those philanthropies that help look at this with us. And that's also part of the way we get at financing the nonprofit sector and the backbones. We want those funders to really learn their way into collective impact, so we see more national funders funding local work in this way. Sorry.
And very quickly, your question about the youth and measuring their transformation, our local collaboratives, that's really part of how they are thinking about not only engagement, but measuring income and outcomes, the outcomes, I should say, over time with these young people.
And I'll just add that we're also working to bring on an evaluator for our work. We can't just talk the talk of, data and metrics, and this is important, but woohoo, we had a good feeling. So we are bringing an evaluator on board so that we understand the outcomes as we go forward as well, and we can share that.
I think we're close to time, though. Any final questions before we wrap it up? Yeah.
Do you know of any initiatives in housing that are going to?
Yeah, there are a number of initiatives around collective impact related to housing. In fact, there's one in my hometown of Seattle, so I'm happy to talk to you afterwards about some of the effort around this. What's interesting is, as we do this work deep with young people, Melody kicks me under the table, but there's no table here, so I get to say this without shin pain. But, as we prove this out with communities that are working with Opportunity Youth, our goal is to then support the kind of collaborative work that can happen in climate change in communities, that can happen around the issues of housing, of health. And there's a lot going on. She doesn't kick me. She kicks me when I say, let's raise a bunch more money and go to all those foundations, because that's a lot of work. Anyway, so there are a lot of examples of this getting started in other places.
We have a sign-in sheet in the back because we really want to keep you all engaged and connected with our work. So we would really be honored if you would just leave your information so that we can continue to share updates with you as our work continues to grow.
Last.
Thank you.
All right. Well, should we grab you after? Let's just talk at the end. Yeah. Thank you all very much. Sorry.